are getting filled, and we are creating change. And the more we talk about it, the more it becomes apparent and becomes obvious. And I think it's, in 5, 10, 20 years, this will be the norm, and people look back and go, remember how ignorant those people were. They didn't really believe in, the extraterrestrials who will be walking among us. But apparently they do walk among us. I had a show this week, and I had some people saying that they had several extraterrestrials, walking amongst us. They revealed themselves eventually, and they looked just like human beings. And I know, TJ, that you worked on a ship. I guess several ships, but your major facility was the location outside Mars. And isn't it true that most of those beings were humanoid? Can you tell us what the people look like that you worked with? And Sasha had a question for you, but he's taking it up. He wanted to know, TJ, which species ordered him to kill somebody? Remember that incident?
That was the human people. But you mean
he
did
human
that?
People.
Yeah, that was his choice. That was his free will. No, he was trying to show they use us because we are like their children in their reality. They found us on this planet billions of years ago. So when they found us here, they weren't the originators, but they are humanoids, such as you and I. And they had the greatest.
Well, can you recount that? Can you recount that again? That tale again?
Sure.
Because I interviewed Tom, and he's long gone now. And we were talking. Sasha and I were talking about this morning. Yeah. So go ahead. Tell us that incident.
Okay, Dr. Scott, what Jane is talking about is sort of the deep end of the pool in the Allied Command. There's literally there's a 2-minute video out there, folks. You can find of me talking about the Allied Command. I sent it to Mad today. My daughter this past just happened to snapshot me doing a video in front of at a conference, and it was more Psi seminar type, more Psi PK. It's like a psychic conference that we discuss theologically how we work together. So what Janet's talking about is my husband, when we were like bilocators. This is something that is hard to explain, but they've proven it scientifically with quantum mechanics and existing evidence that's widespread in science now. Although to some people it's only theory, it's randomness. But for my husband and I, this was reality. So we actually were in a physical place off in space. And it's mind science, so to speak, but our government's way ahead of this, way ahead of Stargate. And not everybody knows about it, but some people did that worked underground. So they had government people around the world, internationally, globally, working together. And we've worked with all nationalities, Russian, Chinese, Spanish, Chinese. People really do know at certain levels that there are beings working together, discussing decidedly what we do in cyberspace. So one of these groups, the one that I know about that I worked with, they are humanoid, and they do work with grays, and I have explanation for that. But one thing they did as the Allied Command is they'd explain some things, and Tom every time would get in a conversation with them when they would beam in through a wormhole. We would be out there in space, so we learned wormhole technology and black holes. So a briefing would be you stay away from the black holes and you travel in the wormholes. And with the technology we have in space, you know when one is going to appear. And that would be very hard to teach the people that are in science at Ames or NASA today. So, or even with the Central Intelligence Agency in Langley or NSA or Air Force or whomever. It's just too far down the road yet. But it was intended for certain people, such as my husband and I, to learn how to do phenomena and finding a fact between what's purely subjective and purely objective. So we were chosen as, I guess you could say, lab rats, but the information that I got was we were chosen before we were born. So I learned about that we really are essence or energy and souls before we come. So that sort of goes with the God story, which I wanted to go there, but Tom didn't, so we got in a big argument because he didn't want anybody to mess with his theology or philosophy. His dad and his grandfather were a preacher, so he didn't want to mess with that. So some thoughts I wanted with an open mind, I didn't get to communicate. So there's holes in it. But the one part Janet's referring to is, I guess, the death and dying part. They didn't have death and dying because they knew how to do souls. So they could just put you back in something else, no big deal. But because the people didn't understand the reality on this planet about death and dying, because they have none. They live thousands of years. It's sort of like the God story in the beginning with Genesis and Moses, and they came down and said this stuff. Well, we're getting sort of a crash course because of who we are, or the DNA they imposed on us, or the 23 and the 2346, whatever, the mixture that we are on this planet. He and I were chosen. And so he was in a class one day up there trying to teach them how we are down here. And they didn't understand death. So he pulled his weapon out and shot a person, and it was a she in a line, and she lay dead. And then they understood death. But Janet, that was his choice. That was a lesson in space that they allowed him to teach. Now, he apparently was asked to teach by the Supreme Allied Command, which I've worked with. That is the 12 at the higher realms. And they choose and run all the universes, or like what you would maybe have heard from Pleiadians or the Federation or Astronaut, whoever, the groups that humans create legend, folklore. You can't prove it, but they channel information about and make books and stories, and you can read about them in the library, especially in the New Age. So there's that level of reality. And Dr. Scott apparently has been chosen to go straight forward and influence that, yes, we know about all these other things that have been written about. But Dr. Scott, I believe part of my soul mission is to come into this existence having full knowledge of being aware that I have been an extraterrestrial in one level as a bilocator my entire life. Janet calls it coming in with a full consciousness. And so she's heard parts of my story with my husband's, because my husband felt like we had to be protected because people would kill us, and if it wasn't our own government, and his life was threatened by our own government, and I don't want to go into that because it's very complicated. So does that answer it, Janet?
Pretty good. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
Now, Dr. Scott heard that in the whole world. So let's let Dr. Scott, have you got any questions about that? That sounds real off the wall.
Yeah, I just don't understand that at all. I always figured that what was going on is that humans just don't know much of anything, and there's probably a lot going on right, where we are that we don't experience or know.
Right. So you don't just drop the information on people like I just did you, or everybody else that may listen and probably won't. But the information's out there, and it's easily trackable and verifiable. However, I think that the people in charge, the top 1%ers, are those that stay in control of running the world like we have a world to run, means that in order to keep the balance with the, we'll just say, the various levels, basically banking, the world banks and Wall Street, for instance. I'm just saying, for instance now, I'm not suggesting. I don't want to get in where I can't do my radio show anymore. So the majority of the people that listen to our types like to masquerade it as conspiracy theories, and then they throw them off the radio when they get enough evidence. So I'm contributing to what I call disclosure in my own way. Can you help me out here, Ahmad?
Not really well, but see, I'm kind of, I want a little proof, I mean, I don't disbelieve anything anybody says, but to sprinkle in a little proof sure helps a lot, if you know what I'm saying.
Right, and all I've got is his testimony. I wasn't there on that one, Janet. I don't know why he honed in on that one.
I mean, most of it would hold up in court, but there's still that speculation there, you see.
Right. And does that protect me as a witness? If Janet had me go in before the court of law, I would have to say this is what I heard firsthand. but it's hearsay. I heard it.
But it's still,
Well,
yeah,
we had his testimonial. He testified. We have that recorded. He testified that. He said that on the air. That's why I know it. He didn't have a private conversation with me about that. So that's public record.
But his statements are still speculative because there's no proof other than his word.
Well, how would we present that with Dr. Scott? Because she's actually going to have a testimony in front of the 50th anniversary that Janet and I are not privileged to due to our funds. She can go and present this based on this radio show. Dr. Scott, I just presented to you a testimony based on the fact that my husband shared many, many stories with me, and some of them I got firsthand as a bilocator, meaning I can feel like I'm there just like you do in a lucid dream, or you do dream, and we all do. So we're into that part of the reality now that we're explaining beta, alpha, theta, delta, gamma, but we're now adding sigma and tau to neuroscience, and we're adding, we don't just have 5, we have 7. So that'll prove, yes.
Let me just interject that Tom was a whistleblower on his deathbed, doing a deathbed
We don't like that term. No, that's
we don't like it, but that's what was going on. He was dying. He knew he was dying. He had terminal, his kidneys were failing. He didn't have long to live. So
that's what they call.
He's telling us his personal truth on the way out the door. He told us many things, and he knew he didn't have long to live because his health was deteriorating. And he knew he came home to die. He told me that. He said, I came home to die. And so I think that has a little bit more punch than someone just, I'm going to make money on it. He wasn't going to make money on it. He had nothing
we haven't
to
made
lose.
Any money. It was never
right.
about
So
the money.
He was just telling this story because he wanted to get it out before he left this earth. So that makes it a little bit more believable than someone, being sensationalist. But I think that the stories that people tell, whether the truth or lies, tell us something. And I look at everything because, they're making it up. Where are they making it up from? What's going on here? Why are they wasting their time to tell lies, or are they lying? Do they believe it? And what's making them believe it? So reality is an elephant, and we all have a different piece of it. And we're just trying to figure out the elephant, but it's just
that's what I was saying way earlier in the show, and I also wasn't saying I disbelieve that he what he's saying is the truth. What I'm saying is that there's just no evidence. See.
Well, what is evidence? Let's look at evidence. What is evidence?
Scientific data.
So what is scientific data? Can you give us an explanation of what is hardcore scientific data?
Well,
give us some examples.
Dr. Scott. She has a PhD.
Okay, Dr. Scott.
If he chopped off one of his fingers and brought it back to us, and we can do a scientific analysis on it, then we'd know for sure.
Well,
he needs a finger.
Who compiles the facts? Look at epistemology and understand knowledge and belief are not the same thing. And we've been doing, starting on that, Janet, Ahmad and I did, on epistemology, and actually put that out out for the record on LinkedIn and Facebook today about epistemology, just the word alone, the difference in what's knowledge and what's one's truth and fact. So we're starting epistemology estimations, at least, of what we all think as a group. So, Dr. Scott, you understand the difference in epistemology, the difference between knowledge and belief, and what epistemology is. But can you tell us, for the record, at least in your own mind, not, this is just a radio show for educational entertainment, okay? And we have a disclaimer in the beginning that nobody's responsible. The theory of knowledge, especially with regard to its methods and validity and scope, is epistemology. So the epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. All right, so we all have that. But Dr. Scott, how would you say? I think scientific evidence means your peers can do a study the same as you and prove to their peers that it can be done over and over again. That's a simple version for, armchair philosophers. What say you, Dr. Scott?
Well, I think that's what science is founded on, is the controlled experiment where people do the same experiment and get the same results. the trouble is with science is that